Hello everybody, thanks for joining me today. I'm Jackie and I create mosaics using sea glass, and today I'm making trees, and I'm going to show you two variations of trees that I'm making using my sea glass, and they're both going to be on 8x10 frames, but they're going to differ a bit. So I'm going to show you how you can have a design that you kind of like and vary it a bit so that you can create different looking pieces of art. So today I'm going to show you two sea glass mosaics that I'm making, and they both entail trees because I love trees. I love working with trees in my art, and I find in particular when you're working with sea glass, the sea glass pieces, the brown sea glass with all of its texture and all of its different sizes can create so much interest in trees. So I really like to work with them. So the things that are varying here, because I'm making two of them, I want you to think about, do you use a dark frame like this, or do you use a light colored frame, because that's going to make your piece look quite different. And the other thing to think about, do you put your frame like this, portrait style, or like this, landscape style? So I'm going to do one dark in portrait style and one light in landscape style. The other thing to think about is your pattern. So I've done two patterns here, one in the portrait style with one tree and the moon in behind, and the other one with three trees and the moon in behind. One of the things that I did in both of these patterns is I blew the moon up, because when you look up in the sky and there's a bit of a full moon, it's often way off in the distance. And then a few times a year we get a supermoon and the moon looks so big. But if you take a picture of it, it's actually still quite small in the sky. So I've kind of blown the moon up in both of these to make them really big and really standing out behind the tree. That's going to be, the brown tree is going to be like a silhouette, then the white moon in behind, and then the sky is green. If you have blue sea glass, I have a bit of blue sea glass, but not enough to do the whole sky. But if you are one of these lucky people that has an endless supply of blue sea glass, I think one of these designs with a blue sky would be really spectacular. I'm sticking with green because that's what I have. So if you're interested in getting the patterns, these two patterns, I'm putting on my website. There's a downloadable version of the pattern. Both patterns will be in the same pattern and instruction on my website, JackieTrimperSeaglass.com, if you want to download that, and then you'll have exactly what I'm making here. So let's get started. The first step that you have to do, and what I've already done, take the glass out of your frame and clean it up, and then put it back into the frame, just the glass, not the backing, and run a bead of silicone all around the outside so that it secures the glass into the frame, and then let it set overnight. So I've done that, and then after it's all dried and set, clean your glass up, and I've done that. And then your next step is to get your pattern. So you can either download the pattern from me, or you can draw your own pattern, and then take your pattern and tape it to the back of the glass. So I'm going to work on both of these at once. I usually only do one sea glass mosaic at a time, but I'm going to work on both of these together and show you the differences as I go. So step 3 is to gather up all your materials. So make sure that you have some clear silicone to attach your sea glass onto your piece. And I always use craft tweezers, and I use these sticks, barbecue skewers, and toothpicks to clean up any messy bits when I'm going. And for sea glass, I'm going to be using brown sea glass for the trees. I've got a tray of brown sea glass here because I'm starting with brown. And I've got a tray of white sea glass over here and a tray of green sea glass. White sea glass for the moon, green sea glass for the sky. And then gather up any other special pieces that you might want to use. I always put in a nutshell in my piece, so I'm going to have my nutshell's picked out before I get started. And then I think you're all set to go. You don't need anything else beyond that. So step 4, you want to start your mosaic. And with a design like this, I would definitely recommend starting with the brown. So we're going to start with attaching all the brown sea glass. So the first thing I did was pick out some sea glass to make my inukshuks, and I'm just going to set those on. I have this really incredible piece of red that I'm going to use for the body of this inukshuk. Now I know that I want to do the trees first, and I wanted to make sure that I've got a couple of nice big brown pieces, so they're kind of like knots in the tree. So I want to put those in place to make sure that I get those in there. And then I'm just going to go about finding pieces of sea glass to fill in all of the branches of the tree and all of the ground down below. Now the other thing that I want you to keep in mind when you're doing this, it's going to look more interesting if you put some bigger pieces of brown in the bottom, because you want your bottom to be kind of heavier than the top parts of the branches. And as you go up the tree, your tree will look more interesting if your branches get a little bit thinner and a little bit smaller in terms of the pieces that you use. And then in this one here, because this one, the trees are smaller, you'll want to use, again, do a little bit heavier in the bottom for the foreground, but the branches themselves, you're going to be using really tiny pieces, so you make those branches look smaller and a bit wispier than they would be in your bigger tree. So I just wanted to point out a few differences between these two pieces, because your trees are different, your pattern's a little bit different. And you want to make sure that there's some variation from one piece to the other. See here, I get some thinner pieces. And this is where working on two pieces at once, I think, is going to work fine for me, because I'm going to kind of make some variations as I go. So I've finished my trees, and I'm really quite pleased with how they've turned out. Just a few things I'd point out. One is the size of the sea glass. So when you look at having bigger pieces at the bottom and a few bigger pieces in here, bigger pieces at the bottom, few bigger pieces here. The other thing is by varying the shade of the sea glass. So there's darker pieces and lighter pieces. All of this is just adding more texture. And another thing I did was right here, I put a row of 4 pieces of sea glass stood on end. Just again, adds a little bit more interest and texture. So I think that's really added to some interest and whatnot of what's going on in my trees. The other thing that you might notice is my branches haven't necessarily followed exactly where my lines are of my pattern. And when you're doing trees, that's fine, because you just want your branches to come up and flow and kind of run nicely together, but they don't have to run against your pattern exactly. But keep that in mind, because the next step, step 5, is doing the moon. And the moon has to follow the line exactly. And you'll find that, well, what always happens to me is the paper slips from the bottom of the back of my glass. So I have a couple of trays here, just white trays, that I'm going to put underneath just to make sure that the paper is pushing up really tightly against the glass. And that way I know I'm not going to lose the line of my circle. The other thing I got thinking about as I was working on this is the whole exercise for this video is to show you how you can make some variations in a pattern in order to make your pieces look different. And I got thinking that I wonder what it would look like to have one of my moons green instead of white. Because you'll notice on my pattern I have green marked in every space that I want on the outside, and then white marked where the moon is. So I've decided on this one, I'm going to vary that. Even though it says white, I'm going to put green, and it says green out here, I'm going to make this all white, just so that you can see how you can really change what your piece looks like depending on the colors that you use. So I'm going to use my tiny pieces of green and fill in every spot where it says white, I'm going to fill in green. And on this piece, every spot where it says white, I'm going to fill in with white pieces of sea glass. So I'm going to have a white moon, and so I finished my moons, and now I just have to fill in the background. So everywhere where I have green on this one, I'm going to put some green sea glass, and I'll fit those all into place and get them glued on. And then on this piece, everywhere where I have green written, I'm going to be putting white sea glass. Now what's going to happen here, all of these tiny little spots that are marked green, I will fill in white. And then when I get it finished, you'll see quite a difference. One of the things that I notice here though, I had been planning to have the sky green, and once I fill it in white, I realize that the body of my inukshuk here is going to blend a little bit too much with the white background. So I want to replace this piece. So I just wanted to point out to you, if you decide to make a change in your design and you want to replace something, you can just use your craft tweezers and pry off a piece of sea glass. And then this is set, but it's not fully set. The silicone is still kind of white even. And then you can just use your glass scraper, scrape the silicone off that piece, and there I can set it aside, use it for something else, and then just scrape what's left on the glass. And what I've done is I've picked out another piece of blue sea glass to put in here instead. Now the other thing that happens, because this is a slightly different shape, I'm also going to have to readjust the arms and the head of my inukshuk because they don't fit as tightly. So I'm going to take those off as well and scrape the sea glass or the silicone off, and then I'm going to be all set with my inukshuk. Is going to work much better now because the background's going to be all white and not green, and it'll stand out much better. So I'll go ahead and finish the sky in my 2 supermoon and tree pieces. So here are my 2 supermoon and tree sea glass mosaics. So you can see the difference of light frame versus dark frame, portrait style versus landscape style, 1 tree versus 3 trees, white moon and green sky versus green moon and white sky. And I really hope it's given you some great ideas on how you can take a sea glass design and kind of change it up and make it look different. Have fun with it. That's why we're here, to have fun. So I hope this has been great. Thanks so much for joining me. And until next time, happy sea glass hunting.